Hello, wrestling fans, and welcome to the JJ Dillon podcast. I am your co-host, JP John Paz, and with me, as always, is the star of the show, two-time Hall of Famer, the leader of the Four Horsemen, the second greatest manager of all time, behind Bobby the Brain Heenan, and of course, he's a former WWF and WCW executive, JJ Dillon. JJ, how are you doing this fine evening?
Great. And John, I was looking forward to this. I'm always excited anytime. I'm really starting to get in the groove with this thing.
This week, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into the Four Horsemen with Lex Luger joining the group, the total package. What's kind of your history with Lex? I mean, we talked a little bit about knowing him from Florida and how he kind of jumped over because of Bruiser Brody and the kind of the abuse that Brody gave him in the cage. But what was your history with the total package, Lex Luger?
Well, I actually, until he came in and joined, I had never met him. I did hear the stories of his time in Florida. I heard positive things that he had a great physique, a handsome guy, good look, but just lacked experience. And at that point, the original Horsemen all were formed by guys that were already established in the top of their game. So Lex was the first attempt at taking somebody that was not at our level in terms of experience and time in the profession and so forth, and see if we couldn't fast track his growth. So we took a shot at it, and I had heard the only thing I knew was that he had an issue with Bruiser Brody, and Frank is he was a really good friend and somebody that I miss, and tragically we lost him way too early. And I had actually wrestled against him. I'd been in tag situations where I was his partner, and he was one of the true legends and icons in our business that, like I say, we just lost him too early. And I heard the story that in Florida, Luger was coming along and was really green, and I never did ask Frank for an explanation of exactly the details of what happened. I just heard that Luger was in a cage match with Frank, and of course you're restricted in a cage match in that, if a guy's inexperienced like Luger was, you can't roll out on the floor and get your second wind, and it just gives you one more piece to play with. And now he's inside a cage, and my understanding was that Frank got very impatient with him, and I can understand that too, being around Lex. And I have all kinds of patience. Frank didn't, and I guess took him to task, and he had to leave Florida. And so Eddie Graham, knowing that Lex should have a great future in the business, notwithstanding the incident with Frank, he had the body, he had everything, and so he wanted to send him up to Charlotte to Jimmy Crockett, and the Horsemen were started, and he was going to be the first one coming in that wasn't already established in the industry, and that we were going to now take a guy and let him get the rub with us to accelerate his his making his reputation in the Mid-Atlantic area. So that's kind of the foundation of how Lex and I met and beginning of that relationship.
When you first met him, you said you could see Frank Bruiser Brody having an issue with him. What was the vibe, or what was the impression, or what kind of energy did he give off?
Well, I could see that he had the look. He had the size, and he had the look. And it's funny how things stick in your mind, that first impression. And when he did a couple of interviews, he very much, I think, watched some other interviews, wanted to mimic people like Bobby Heenan, or to a degree myself in the business. And one thing that really stuck out with me was, and he wanted to use, which I always did to a big degree of facial expressions, of pausing at certain points, and there were subtle things that I would do. I mean, I could be in the middle of a conversation and remove my glasses, as I just did, even though people can't see it. And I was totally relaxed. I had done so many interviews all my career that I could pause and look away as if my mind was distracted somewhere, thinking about the subject and kind of collecting my thoughts. And I could put my hand on my forehead and rub my temples. And these were all the little things that I did. And I think, and I'm not saying Lex was imitating me in particular, but I think he wanted to try and mimic people in the business that were successful with interviews and had a great reputation. Just as an example, if I was going to have a comment with you and I wanted to, I was building up to a certain point, and when I wanted to make that point, I might pause for a second, and I may look you, I may even lean forward and use my finger and point it right at you,
right?
Just to emphasize that moment, that point. And Lex would be talking, and he would do a motion like that, point his finger, but it would be in the middle of a sentence that would not be would not be timed to whatever he was talking about. In other words, he didn't build up to a point that he was trying to make. He would just do the motion without understanding, well, the impact of the motion is timing it with whatever you're saying that you want to have people in particular pay attention to. So that's the one thing about Lex that that sticks in my memory.
A lot of people said first impression of him, because he is so big and he is not really cocky, so to speak, but he's very self-confident. They always said when he walks into a room that, you could tell he was full of himself, or you tell he's really high on himself. Is that the kind of impression you got when you first met him? That, wow, this guy is, a super confident guy here.
I over my career, I've probably met, I don't want to, that's a general statement, say I've met anybody and everyone that was involved or a player in our business. And though, starting as a teenager back when, with Buddy Rogers and the Big O Bob Orton and as a manager, Bobby Davis. I talk about great managers, and I certainly give kudos to Bobby the Brain Heenan. But Bobby Davis, who was Buddy Rogers' manager back when I first started watching, and it was a black and white television, and they were on every Thursday night for an hour and a half. Bobby Davis was tall, he was very lean, even to the point of being skinny, and back then he had I don't know if people would remember Elvis Presley with the ducktail, the way he combed his hair back, and long in the back and almost to a point that would be a line down the back of his head. And he because of his height and the way he combed his hair, and I don't know if he ever was told that, but just you looked at him, and before he ever opened his mouth and said anything, he garnered a lot of heat to the point that you'd think, I'd like to take and slap this guy alongside of his head. And that's a tremendous character trait to have if you're going to be a villainous character in our business. And he was. he was very, very good. But when Lex came along, that was much later, and the only thing I heard was that Jimmy Crockett had told me, because we didn't talk, back and forth with promoters in other areas at that point. It was before the internet and before cable television. And so Eddie, or Jimmy Crockett came to me and he said, Eddie has this guy that's broke in Florida. He's got a great physique, though he is really green. And unfortunately, they built up, accelerated a program where he was against Frank Goodish, Bruiser Brody, and it was in a cage match. And again, Brody was somebody who didn't have a lot of patience. And, he just, I wish I was there. I would really fully understand it. But knowing Frank, knowing the players, I almost could see what was happening without being there. And Brody just lost it. And whether he got frustrated because Luger did some things that an experienced guy wouldn't do, because a lot of times, a guy like Frank would be leading the match, and if a guy like Luger did something impromptu that didn't fit with the story that Brody was trying to sell, that could be very frustrating, because a guy like Brody would say, "Oh God, now I got to start all over," and of course Luger had no idea what was going on, and I get Brody Brody lost his patience. Didn't last too long, and he started. I'm not saying that he took liberties and deliberately tried to hurt another guy, but he just, you could take somebody like that's inexperienced and slap him around just out of frustration, not making it right. But a guy like Frank that was a top guy in the business. And he's looking at a guy like Luger that had a great physique and was being given the opportunity to be in the ring with Brody, which was going to immediately put him at a much higher level in the ring than his experience would indicate that he should be. And just, and I can't think of other examples, but I've seen things like that happen. And it got so bad that Brody manhandled Luger, and Luger couldn't roll out of the ring because it was a cage match. And finally, Luger got so frustrated that he actually got up to the top turnbuckle, climbed over the top, went down the cage, and went back to the dressing room, grabbed his clothes, never even changed, and was gone. And boy, I almost could be a fly on the wall and see that happening, knowing Goodish and knowing Luger. But
and then, of course, in January and February of '87, basically the beginning of '87, he becomes a new member of the NWA and makes quite an appearance, because he immediately becomes not a member of the Four Horsemen, but an interesting little caveat, an interesting little twist. He becomes an associate member of the group, but he expressed desire to join the group. So, and immediately and initially, he's already kind of establishing himself that he's a threat, so to speak, but more to Ole. It's almost like, wow, there's some tension here. Maybe Ole's leaving. Maybe Luger's a new member. How did that kind of all get set up? Because it's interesting, the associate angle and not actually a member of the Horsemen. So.
Yeah, because it was like it was a work in progress. And one of the things, and it's on tape somewhere, and I recently looked at it, was a battle royal. And in the battle royal, Luger was considered either on the verge of becoming a full-time member, but he was strongly associated with the Horsemen. And in the battle royal, the Horsemen, would work with each other and eliminate the top threats in the battle royal until it got down to Luger and I know it was Tully and I think Ole. I don't remember who, but it was like as a kind of gesture to me, someone who, if like the Las Vegas odds would have said that when the whole thing started, I had the least chance of winning the thing, but I was in it because I'm in the ring with my guys, and little by little they eliminated the greater threats, and when it got down to it, it was myself, Luger, and I don't know if it was Tully and Arn or Ole, I don't remember, but it might have been just us. And so they kind of looked at each other and just nodded, looked at me, and it kind of like a mental communication was, hey, JJ's our manager. He was in this thing just more to help orchestrate us and to be watching our backs. And I don't think he ever really thought about the possibility of him winning the thing. And now it's down to us with Luger. And you know what? We'd like to do a little surprise for JJ and have him win this thing. First ever in his career. So one by one, the guys eliminate themselves over. And I'm looking, and it's like, what are you guys doing? And they're all kind of looking away, not making eye contact. And it got left with Luger and I. Luger was the only one left. And so the guys on the outside are kind of looking up at Luger saying, you know, what are you waiting for? Kind of without verbalizing that initially. And they're standing there looking at Luger, and Luger is, you know, he's all into intensive competition, and the thought of him eliminating himself to give me the win was furthest from his thought process at that point. Well, my other guys had done that and eliminated themselves. They're on the outside, and it's just Luger and I, and I think Arn had a nickname for Luger that was. Arn had nicknames for everybody, and I'm trying to think what it was, but it was something that was like. Anyway, he's and Luger, and they're on the outside, and Arn's looking up at Luger and said, you know, what are you doing? Eggplant. That's what he called him, eggplant. He said, hey, eggplant, what are you doing? You know, as if to say, you could see what we were doing and get with the program. What are you doing still standing in there? And Luger is like trying to process it, and he's mentally ready to lock up with me. And, you know, odds were that he was probably got a very good shot at eliminating me and winning the thing. And the other guys on the outside are standing there with their arms folded, and it was like, hey, you know, eggplant, what are you waiting for? And I'm trying to think how it ended. I don't know if Luger eliminated me or, but that created, it was one of the pieces of a puzzle that the fans, if they're watching over an extended period of time, realize that Luger's days would eventually be numbered as a horseman, because he was like he was the spoke that didn't fit right with the wheel.
Yeah. And that's actually towards the end of Luger's run, the Horseman. That's the Bunkhouse Stampede match.
Yep.
And you think you're going to win, and Luger ends up taking it. Luger ends up winning and eliminating you, and the Horsemen are pissed at him. And then eventually,
yeah. And it wasn't like it wasn't like the plan to do that. It just was a spontaneous thing that the Horsemen all worked together to eliminate everybody, and it was down to just myself and the Horsemen. And so the Horsemen were kind of looking at each other, nodding with a little grin, and, you know, one of them eliminates himself, the other eliminates himself, the other one eliminates themselves, and I'm looking like, what are you guys doing? And that I would have thought I would have been the one to eliminate myself, so that one of them, which would be much more deserving than it was for me, and Luger's standing there with that look about, oh, you expect me to eliminate myself when it's me and him? And sometimes you can get more of a message with just a look and just letting the people digest what they're seeing. And somebody doesn't have to explain it. It's not like a commentator. It's what's unfolding speaks for itself. And it's like I'm still in there, and before I could eliminate myself, the other guys eliminated themselves. And as a surprise to me, they wanted the one guy who nobody figured could possibly win the thing. And they wanted to do it for me because they held me in high regard. And the only one that was Luger. And of course, when Luger eliminated me, then oh boy, that was like, the unforgivable sin, and that planted the seed, and eventually it created an instant opponent on the other side against us.
Yeah, as soon as anybody kind of goes after Flair's title or says they want the title, that's when the Horsemen jump in, and that creates the friction and the tension and the controversy for sure. But when Luger first kind of joins the group, it is interesting that he's just an associate, but also interesting that Ole is still there, but they keep teasing. They leave him out of stuff. He ends up costing Arn and himself the title at Starrcade 86. So even leading into Luger coming in, they keep kind of teasing tension with Ole. Was the plan always to slowly but surely get Ole out? You just have to figure out who you're going to put in?
Well, we had such a great run with the original Horsemen, which included Ole. And in True to Life, it was a time when Ole's son was a senior in high school, and I think he was wrestling and playing football, and he was, I think, the quarterback. And so Friday nights were the home games for most of high school football, and so Ole wanted the time. He wanted, which he was certainly entitled to it, and I don't think anybody ever raised the idea that, you mean you're choosing your own son against being with a Horseman? We cared enough about each other legitimately on a personal level that here was a guy, Ole, this is his son is only going to be a senior that one time and quarterback on the football team. And so Ole is going to travel to all the road games and whatever, and which meant he, missed some shots. And we were all, hey, no problem. So it was a real life situation that created a scenario for Luger to come in where Ole was.
And he wanted to watch his son, Brian, and obviously do sports and things like that, and he wanted to be a father, which is good, but doesn't kind of align up with the Horsemen. And I love that promo where Tully says to Ole, go play or go hang out with your snot-nosed kid or something, and Ole snaps on him.
Yep.
It's just like the perfect way to kind of break up the group.
Yeah, and it was totally in character for Tully to say something like that. And you can understand Ole's character and having Tully, we used to laugh and smile when Tully would say things to other people because he was one of us. But when he fired on Ole, and Ole just, reaction slapped him and we had to separate him. It was, and if I remember right, this happened out of an interview, and the confrontation between the two of them came right at the end of, as they were about to go off the air, and they went off of the set, and they're over there, and there's chairs and stuff, and there's curtains, and in other words, it was people looking and say, well, wait a minute, they never show off the set right next to it. This is something really's happened here, and that in heightened the impact of what happened. And so it ended up taking a real life situation, and what it did too was because Ole was a main eventer, whether he was a heel, babyface, it didn't matter. So that created the situation where now Ole was on the other side, teaming with Sting and with the Road Warriors and whatever, and so that gave that whole thing a whole fresh. It was like we were starting all over, and red hot with Ole.
And it was so cool just the way it was done. You're right. It was such realism.
It was something. Think about it, man. The way it was done, it was something that a lot of times the fans, if they watch every week, they can pick up on things and kind of anticipate that something is about to happen. And there's, you lose that surprise. You have the surprise factor with a lot of your fans, but there's a lot of your fan base that see the small things that I'm not surprised. I could see this coming. So the thing with Ole, they didn't see that one coming, and that gave it more impact. And as I think back on that time.
And do you think Luger was the right guy to replace him? Because in March of '87, Ole is officially out and Luger is officially in. No more an associate member. He's joining the group. You think he was the right guy to replace Ole?
Well, it was like, again, going back to he was in Florida, Luger was, and had that situation with Frank Goodish in a cage match, and Goodish wiped up the floor with him out of frustration because Luger was totally inexperienced and just, maybe wasn't humble when he should have been with somebody like Brody, and so he climbed out of the cage and eliminated himself, packed his bags, and left. So now Eddie calls Jimmy Crockett, like I said, and says, I have this guy, and boy, this thing happened, and it's a situation that I can't fix or smooth over. When something like this happens, Luger's got to go. And so he's a young talent. He's got some experience, but he's still basically inexperienced and green. But he's got an incredible body, and he wanted him to go somewhere where they would understand the situation. Which Eddie had a good relationship with Jimmy Crockett, and so that was a logical place for him to go. And then it was also logical for him because we hadn't had a revolving door of somebody coming into the Horsemen, and Luger was going to be the first one. So that was a pretty big deal in and of itself. And the way it played out, it really worked. And immediately Luger went from being in Florida and coming into the Carolinas and immediately being a major player.
It's kind of rare that a guy can kind of just come from a different territory and immediately get put in a group like that and immediately become, like you said, a major player or a main eventer just by the rub, just by being with those guys, just by being associated with those guys. You think that really benefited Luger at that point? Like we're saying, he's so green, but he's got such a great look. You think that was like the perfect thing that he really needed at that point? Guys like Arn and Tully and Flair teaching him the ropes?
Yeah, as I look back, it was a, and I don't know if Luger realized it at the time, but it was an incredible opportunity for him to come in, green as grass, and be able to have Tully and Arn and Ole and myself be able to groom him, and also not allow him to be exposed as being really inexperienced. These guys were the best in the industry, period. Not only in the Carolinas, but to me, Tully and Arn, and I'm a bit prejudiced, I guess, but to me, they were the greatest tag team that I ever saw, and they also as individuals, and Arn just became a great interview because his interviews were different. And as a performer in the ring, he was not the biggest, but he just had it together. And especially when he was teamed with Tully, it just, when you look back at different crossroads in the business and being in the Carolinas at that time, and I remember when Arn had been down in Pensacola, which is where he's from, and needed to go and get exposure, and that's how he ended up in the Carolinas. And we could see immediately that this guy's, he's destined to be one of the all-time greats, which he was, and he's a great guy, not only a great performer in the business, but a great human being, and one of my closest friends in the business. I joke with him that he is like the brother that I never had. That's how close we are.
That is great, and I think anytime that you can be associated with Arn and Tully is just unbelievable. And for Luger to be that green and that in shape and that great looking, but and the flip side, not be that great in the ring as of yet and really just not be as well developed, just the perfect complement. Do you think that the chemistry at all was altered as far as being a Horseman when you take out Ole and you put in Luger, or do you think everything was just kind of remain the same?
Well, you have something, and promoters tend to take something that's successful, like the Horsemen, and take that original group, and they would ride it like riding a horse until the horse falls and can't get up. They would, they'd get him up and he'd run one more time, and then finally he just can't get up anymore. And that's kind of how it was. The Horseman thing was so hot and so successful, and we had such great success that, and then it's like with that original group. I think it's healthy for the group to have a change, and having Ole move out with Luger coming available, it really was when Eddie Graham called Jimmy, and Jimmy talked to me and said, this guy's got a hell of a body. He's green, and you guys haven't been in a situation where you had one of your group. You guys are all established. You're all top names in the business, and so now. Here's a guy that to get the maximum out of him, because he's certainly got the look and everything. You guys are the best in the business and are going to be able to camouflage his lack of experience and be able to protect him from exposing himself.
I love that. You camouflage, you protect him. Do you think adding him to the group and taking out, do you think that it hurt the momentum at all? Because the Horsemen were so over and they're so huge. Do you think it hurt the momentum at all? I don't actually. I actually think
I don't think so
almost, and I almost think, which is crazy to say, he almost enhanced them for a little bit.
Yeah, and sometimes a change like that. I mean, we were over so big and had such a great run, and the question, well, if you hadn't done the thing with Luger and the original group just stayed together, well, what would you guys, if you've been at the top of the pecking order, for another year, 2 years, 3 years, who knows? I mean, we just had a chemistry with us, and we generally enjoyed each other's company, and because a lot of times when you have like four guys like that, and I was the fifth guy. But sometimes on an interview, and it might be Tully, it might be Arn, it might be me, that would, and a lot of times we wouldn't discuss ahead of time a plan, because we all knew who at that particular, it was always Dusty and somebody. Whether it was Dusty and Valiant and Dusty and the Road Warriors were our main competition across from the ring. So we always had to keep that interest there, not let that go. So with interviews, nobody had to come say to us, well, no, you guys need to talk about that. No, I'm not saying that we would have been insulted if they tried to do that, but they just knew enough not to. They didn't see where we had gone out there and all of a sudden, geez, that interview, could have been better. We just were so good as competitors in the ring, bell to bell, and interview wise as a group. There were some times where we all could say something, which really wasn't all that often, or without talking about it ahead of time. Just, I might have something with the scenario where I'd say, hey, let me start this. And sometimes I'd start and get on a roll and end up taking the whole interview. And another time it might be Arn say, hey, let me take this. Let me start this one. And Arn might end up taking the whole thing. But the other part that contributed to the success was that we didn't just stand there like robots. That as Arn was talking, I would be. It's kind of like managing. I would be in the corner managing somebody, and I didn't want to be jumping up and down and distracting from the match. And sometimes if you're and I've seen this happen where somebody is a manager and they didn't wrestle like I did or wasn't part of a scenario like that. And, business gets a little slow and all of a sudden the guy's thinking, well, boy, if they decide they need to cut back a little bit, man, I'm going to be the top of the chopping list. So I need to go out there and be animated, do something just to kind of let the promoter know that, hey, I'm important. You need to keep me good. And a lot of guys thought that way. I never did because that's you say, well, it's your ego. Nah, well, maybe to a degree, but I knew what I was capable of doing. And if I stopped being a manager and went back to being a competitor with the tights on every night, I can handle that too. It just gave me an added dimension to being the manager, to when I did put on the tights and wrestle. And I learned from Bobby Heenan, the greatest manager of all. And he told me one time, one night in Houston, I went out and I hadn't wrestled there, and I went out and I tried to incorporate all the skills. My timing wasn't exactly sharp, but all the skills. And I remember Paul Bosch. I'm thinking, he's going to be really happy. And because they used to come by and pay after in Houston, and when he came in, I could just see by the look on his face. And then at that point, it dawned on me, oh God, you didn't stop and think about what you were doing. You went out there and you wanted to perform not for that audience that had an expectation of you, but for the guys in the back, some of whom hadn't seen you wrestle for 6 months or 9 months or a year, and you wanted to remind them that you were a main event man in most of the territories that you ever appeared in. So I'm out there working for them, not for that audience that doesn't know about my whole reputation, because I'm just like new to that territory. And Paul reinforced that, and I remember apologizing to Paul and saying, Paul, I just, it'll never happen again. And that's when I realized that there's a skill to, yes, being on top and being able to structure a match and your timing, but as a manager, that audience looks at you as somebody who you talk a good game like you're a big deal and you're going to be out there and I'm going to be so great. But when you get out there, you want to show them that by your performance, you're far from as great as you would like to think you are. Mm. And then that lives up to their expectations of wanting to see you fumble and fall and get your butt kicked. So it just was a great learning experience. And, I had such a great career being around people like Bobby Heenan that, was somebody that I could look up to, and because Bobby wrestled too. And I heard Nick Bockwinkel. I had a conversation with Nick Bockwinkel one time, and we were talking about Bobby. And he said that when Bockwinkel and Stevens had an incredible run in California for like a couple of years, and then went to Minneapolis, and Bobby Heenan was their manager. And he said if one of us legitimately got hurt, meaning he or Stevens, that they would maybe be out for 5 days or a week. He said Bobby Heenan could go in, put the tights on, and work the match and be as good, and he went so far as to say, if not better than either he or Stevens. Bobby had it all. He could work, he could perform, he could talk, he could manage. I mean, Bobby had it all.
Bobby was so great, and of course, you guys do have it in common. He managed Lex Luger at one point as well, which is kind of just a cool little tie-in.
Yeah.
But as far as
that should be a big deal to Luger, not to Bob.
Yeah, exactly. But as far as kind of going back to '87 with Luger, it is so interesting that it keeps the momentum going because this is, I think, so many people remember the Four Horsemen when you think of War Games and you think of that match. It's not only part of War Games. He's already gone months ago. He's already gone. The Horsemen kicked out. It's Arn, yourself, Flair, Tully, and Luger as the Horsemen. So many people remember War Games. So that's why he's so associated with the Horsemen, I think, because so many people remember War Games. And obviously the first War Games is Dusty and Nikita and Paul Ellering and the Road Warriors. But am I right on that? I think he's so associated with the Horsemen because of those War Games matches.
And what was, I think there were like 11 or 12. They took it around, took it to ballparks and what have you, but they didn't.
Yeah, the Great American Bash '87 tour.
They didn't beat it to death. They picked specific big markets and made it a big deal. And the first one was July 4th at the Omni in Atlanta. And it was 2 cages, 2 rings side to side with the 2 cages all around it and a cage on top. And as they were ready for the finish, Animal got behind, came under me and scooped me up so that now I'm sitting on his shoulders and he's got my legs locked. And it's like, oh, how'd I get up here? I don't like the look of this. And then all of a sudden he's walking around with me and I look and see, the guy that clotheslined me.
Hawk.
I see Hawk climbing, going between the cage to get up to the top turnbuckle, and his eyes are like this, and my eyes are like this, his eyes were like baseballs, my eyes were like basketballs, and it's like, oh man, I'm thinking, here's Hawk, and he's crouched, and he's got that arm cocked, and he's going to launch, and Animal's got me, and I'm halfway across the ring. And I'm thinking, the thing's got a cage, so he's going to have to really, really come out. And the more I'm processing all this, I thought, this is not such a good idea for me. And as he's about to take off, I decided to come down. And, as powerful as Animal was, if you're up on his shoulders and don't want to be there, and you come down and make it difficult for him to manage your weight, which is what happened. And now I'm coming down head first to the center of the ring, more concerned with what would happen if I stayed up there and got clotheslined by Hawk coming off the top turnbuckle. And I'm coming down head first, and in that split second, I'm thinking, I could break my neck and die on this spot. And so at the last second, I tucked my chin and turned my head and buried my shoulder. And I think I've already probably shown you, which people at home can't really see it. But this is 30 years ago, and I had a choice that night. I was laying in the middle of the ring, and right there you can see it good. And I don't have any pain or discomfort, but it was a mess. And went to the hospital that night, and they said, well, it's not broken. It's a severe dislocation. You probably would have been better off if you broke it. And he said, we have 2 choices. We could do surgery, and we can smooth it out so it'll be level, or you can pass surgery and be in a sling, and it'll be 6 weeks in a sling until that thing your shoulder muscles and all will adjust themselves to that change in structure. And I thought, I don't want a surgery if I don't have to. And I went back from Atlanta that night and went to the hospital in Charlotte where I was living, and that's where the doctor said, well, you got 2 choices. We can take you into surgery and we can fix that. And if you don't want to do the surgery, you can wear a sling and let all the parts of that thing kind of make the adjustment on their own. The problem is you're going to have that hump on the one side. And I wasn't somebody that used to go down to the beach to parade around, and the thought of having that hump on that side was not that big a deal for me. And so I opted I didn't want to have the surgery if I didn't have to. And so 30 years later, I have that reminder as maybe my badge of courage. I don't know.
Yeah,
It was the worst injury that I ever had. And what it did, because when I came down, I was laying in the middle of the ring, and Dusty and I had he was the catalyst across the ring, but unbeknownst to virtually anybody other than our immediate families, Dusty and I were very, very close personally as friends. And, I'd sneak over to his house at Christmas when he'd have a small circle of people there. And we were personally very, very close, and didn't socialize, didn't go anywhere where people would ever see us together because, but that injury, then as the war games went around to other places, that was a big selling point about this is the most dangerous match in wrestling. Just look at me and the damage that I suffered at the very first war games in Atlanta. So that kind of like, wow, boy, this is bad. All those big bodies flying around, and so that was the one plus side. It was good for business.
Absolutely good for business. The blood, the injuries, it was definitely cool. Were you kind of just basically in that match to lose it, so to speak? Because you don't obviously want Rick losing, or maybe Arn or Tully, and definitely not Luger because you're trying to build them up. Were you just essentially in the match just to take the loss?
As I remember, it started with two guys, which was always Arn, and I forget who from the other side.
Usually Dusty.
And then 2 minutes later, we would supposedly flip a coin, but we always won the coin toss. So then one of the heels from our side would go in, and it was 2-on-1 against the babyface for 2 minutes. And they had a scoreboard clock up there, like a basketball scoreboard clock, and then people would be counting down. And there was one of the babyfaces standing there, and the referee's got that key, and there's a padlock there, and he won't, come on, open it, open. No, I can't open it. And then finally, boom, and the buzzer would sound, and he'd charge in, and even the sides up again, 2-2. So it was an interesting match to work, and everybody that was in it were seasoned performers that knew how to do it. And of course, the heel always got the advantage at 2 minutes till the babyface came in and even the sides up. Then the next 2 minutes was because we were alternating, and the heel would be back in, and the heels would be one up, and we'd get the advantage. And then I was the last one in, so the match couldn't end until all 10 participants were in the ring. So I was the last one to go, and I think they called it the match beyond. Now begins. In other words, up to that point, which was almost 20 minutes into it, it was a war and blood and whatever, but the match couldn't end until the last guy from each team was in, and I was the last guy. And I was the sacrificial lamb in more ways than one. But and the fact that I got hurt as we took the match around, and they didn't beat it to death. They took it to major stadiums and things, but it drew huge everywhere, in part because of the legitimate injury that I suffered. And they thought, this is truly the most dangerous match in wrestling.
So cool. I mean, anybody goes back and watch it, just an awesome, unbelievable match. Critically acclaimed. It's just an awesome, awesome match. And you think back about kind of the way that the Horsemen are being built up. Obviously, the main guys, the main catalysts, so to speak, against the Horsemen, Dusty, Nikita, the Road Warriors. Like you said, a little bit sprinkle in maybe Jimmy Valiant, Ronnie Garvin.
Yep,
you sprinkle in some Ronnie Garvin. Yeah, you sprinkle in these guys. But if you think about it, they're kind of almost grooming Luger the whole time. They tease that that he wants the NWA title, then he wins the U.S. title from Nikita with your help. Then you kind of cost him at Starrcade 87. You cost him the U.S. title against Dusty. So then they tease it again, and he's mad at you. And then, like you mentioned before, with Bunkhouse Stampede, Arn's like, all right, like you said, eggplant, let's go, let's get out of the ring. Everybody, let's go. And he won't do it. He goes, I'll make the right decision. Or I forget what the exact word, but he basically goes, when Arn turns back, he's like, I'll make the right decision. Then he beats you up, and you're shocked. I mean, it's so good.
Yeah, a handful of hair, seat of the pants, and whoo.
Yep.
and the guys on the outside are, what? And I mean, that
and your promos after that are great too. I mean, so good. It's basically Rick, Arn, and Tully in the back, and they're kind of just like stewing and stuff. But it's just you going crazy. Luger, what you thinking about? This was my big chance. This is my big win. It was so well done.
The guys all sacrificed themselves for me. Yeah. I never asked them. I didn't want it. They wanted it for me. And then the more it got closer to happening, wow, I thought, what a special moment. The guys really care about me. They want me to have this moment. And you spoiled it. It was a simple story, but so easy to follow and so easy to talk about on the backside.
Yeah, absolutely. So was Luger always, as soon as he got there, was that somebody that Flair was like, all right, let's groom him as a contender. He'd be a great contender for the title. Was Dusty saying that? Or was that just kind of assumed?
I think that was assumed that when he was coming in, we were going to bring him with us, and then eventually, he would go to the other side, and then that would be that would be the first one that was part of us that now is on the other side, and just made Luger, really did. And it was good for us too. Good for business in general.
Yeah, it was good all the way around. I think he was the perfect guy. I almost think he is super underrated to a point where he is so believable. As soon as you look at him, like, wow, this guy just looks like a pro wrestler. Such a great body. I think he had like 2% body fat or something ridiculous like that. Probably the greatest body ever in the history of wrestling. I know some people might say Warrior or somebody else, but probably the greatest body ever in wrestling. Everything about him just clicked. And I feel like almost as he started to get more experience, he became a lot better in the ring than people give him credit for.
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah, in the beginning we definitely had to camouflage his lack of experience, and we were over so, and the theme of the Horsemen with the other side, it with him switching over, he didn't have to do much. He he could stand there and pose, and I run and oh man, oh god, we laugh now, but the fans just they couldn't get enough of it.
Was he kind of a pet project of yours? Like, was Dusty kind of pull you off the side, like, hey, help him with promos or help him with this? Was that a project of yours to really kind of make sure that he was trained absolutely perfectly?
Dusty and I were very close. Dusty was the booker, and I was his assistant. When I had I always wanted to book, and I always wanted to work for Eddie Graham. And Jody Hamilton had been there, and I finally got the booking job in Florida. And it was a eye-opening experience because I had Eric Embry, I had Charlie Cook. I didn't have much of a new, and I didn't realize that the great bookers always brought with them, be it Watts or whoever, or Dusty, always had 3 or 4 main event guys. When he went in to book, they came in with him. So the whole package had an impact, a positive impact on the territory. I never realized that. Now I'm in Florida, and I had Don Jardine was the heel, and we didn't explode the business. And all of a sudden the realization was I can produce a television show, put a great show together, I can book matches, I can do all these things, but I had to, as I looked around at these other guys that were successful bookers, they all had a handful of guys that were, quote unquote, their guys, that when he went in to book, they went in with him. So it was a package deal. I never processed that. Now all of a sudden I'm there, and I think I had Eric Embry as a main event guy, and Charlie Cook, which is I'm not disparaging them, but I didn't come in with a with a group of guys around me that were quote unquote established huge stars in the business. And so I'm trying to think. It was Dory and Terry, and he was going to have to bring them in, and then Dory. I don't know if it was Terry was going to be the booker, I think, or Dory be the booker, or whatever. But they were both coming in, and they told Eddie, because I had worked in Amarillo a couple times and had a great relationship with them, and there was no conversation with me. But come to find out, they told Eddie, we'll take over, we'll come in and be the quote-unquote bookers, but JJ stays as part of the team, which was really says a lot about them, and I guess in a way says a lot about the reputation that I had in the industry and the level of respect. And so we came in, and that really popped things. And then they didn't want to move in. They didn't want to leave Texas and move to Florida. And so then Dusty came back from, I don't know where Dusty had been, maybe for a run in New York. And Dusty came in, which popped the thing again. And then Dusty had always wanted to book. And so the Funks hadn't moved over there. And so Eddie agreed to because he was going to help, work with Dusty and manage him. And I didn't really have a relationship with Dusty, but when Dusty came in, and whether the Funks talked to him, I don't know, but Dusty said, I'll come in, but I remain in the same role. And it's Dusty and I.
And as we kind of bring it back around, kind of bring it back to the Four Horsemen in 1987 and that Lex Luger era of the Four Horsemen, would you give it the thumbs up as far as the transition from Ole to Lex? For me, I just thought it was an awesome transition at that time and that period to switch over to Lex and to keep the momentum going and to keep them strong and for War Games, everything else. Would you say that the Lex Luger experiment was definitely a good one for the Four Horsemen?
I think we made it work. And the thing with Ole wanted to go see his son, as an amateur and wanted the days off. And then Jimmy said, well, Eddie Graham's Luger's got to leave Florida because he got in a situation with Brody, and it got so bad that Brody beat him up so bad that it really hurt him in the territory, and he actually climbed out of the cage and walked out and gone. So he said, Eddie called, and so we're going to bring him in here. He's got a hell of a body. He's just doesn't have a wealth of experience, and we could work around him. So that's how that all came about. And we were able to camouflage Luger, not put him in situations where we exposed the fact that he really wasn't experienced, and it really brought him along. He was very very coachable, very very coachable, and definitely had the size and the look, and we made it work.